This video coincides with Chapter 15, Section 2, the Great Depression. Please make sure you read over this section before watching this video. Take notes as you go through. So let's remember after World War I, every major European country was nearly bankrupt. They'd spent so much money on the war. They had not expected the war to take so long or to cost so much. And in addition to that, their domination worldwide in terms of being imperialistic powers was much diminished. So the European countries in particular were hard hit by World War I and its devastating effects. Um, so when all these new countries were created out of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, or out of what is now the Soviet Union and Germany, there's many difficulties that arose with this new idea of democracy. For a long, long time, these countries in Eastern Europe had always been under the rule of monarchs, and so this new idea of democracy was very, very new to them, and they didn't know how to handle things. So a lot of them formed coalition governments, and this is when political parties share power. So there wasn't too much of a power struggle, but a lot of times these coalition governments don't get along with each other and can cause problems in the future. This instability led to a lack of strong leadership and indecision on long-term goals. Uh, and so countries weren't making progress the way that they had hoped. And so people wanted to revert kind of back to the old monarchical ways where they'd have a king with a strong leadership who could make decisions for them and move them forward. So people were really starting to look for a strong authoritarian leadership, and we'll see where that leads us leading up to World War II. So Germany, the Kaiser Wilhelm, who was kind of the king of Germany, had to resign, and a new government kind of sprung up in its stead, which was known as the Weimar Republic. So this new government was set up in 1919, but it was very weak from the beginning. There was a lot of infighting, and in addition, people weren't used to voting for things or democracy, so there's going to be a lot of problems with the Weimar Republic. Uh, Probably the biggest problem for that faced the Republic right away was the rapid, ridiculous inflation that Germany was facing. During World War I, they had printed a whole lot of money, just printed money to pay for the war. And then, kind of as a punishment to those countries, specifically France and Britain, that made them sign the war guilt clause, in order to pay off the reparations, they just kind of continued to print money. And so they were just printing lots and lots of money, and this resulted in severe, severe inflation. So you can see this picture over here of these students, and they're actually playing with blocks, but these blocks are actually pounds of Deutschmarks of the German money. So they're playing like this as if it is nothing itself. And so we're eventually going to lead up to the financial collapse. The 1920s was a time of kind of prosperity, especially in the United States. It was known as the Roaring Twenties, but that's all going to come down to, it's gonna boil down to the financial collapse, to the Great Depression. So there are several weaknesses in the United States economy, and at this point in world history, a lot of economies across the world are pretty integrated with each other. They rely on each other for imports and exports, as well as for markets to sell their goods. So when one economy, especially one as big as the United States, collapses, it's going to hurt the rest of the world as well. But some of the weaknesses of the U.S. economy were wealth disparity and overproduction of agriculture. So with the wealth disparity, a majority of the population can't even afford to buy the goods that are being produced. So the United States, after World War I, became a large producer of a lot of the goods, or industrialized goods in the world, but they didn't. Normal people that worked in the factories actually didn't have the money to buy the goods that were being produced. So once that starts happening, demand for these goods starts to fall. Prices start to get cheaper as well. And then more and more people are actually going to get laid off because people aren't buying the goods. They don't need to make the goods anymore, so you no longer have a job. And this is going to kind of create this downward spiral where people stop buying goods, therefore people stop making goods. That makes people get fired, and in return, even fewer people are able to buy goods. So this downward spiral is going to cause a huge problem in the United States. In addition to that, there was an overproduction of agriculture. During World War I, the United States was producing a ton of food for the world, not just for themselves, but for the world. And the opening up of these agricultural markets made it tough for the United States farmers to really compete with a lot of the rest of the world. So the farmers compete with other farmers worldwide, but they can't really sell their goods at a profit, and therefore cannot repay their loans. So a lot of farmers had to take out loans in order to buy machines, buy seeds, buy fertilizers, and things like that. And when they can't sell their goods for a profit, that means that they can't repay the banks that they borrowed this money from. This is obviously going to cause a lot of problems because of the no loan payoff. Some banks have to close. We'll talk about this a little bit more in class, and how this actually worked out. In 1929, the U.S. factories made nearly one half of the world's industrial goods. So as these factories are closing, less and less products are going across the world. So in 1929, the stock market crashes. So the way this works is that people are borrowing more money than they should have to buy stocks in the market. So people who didn't really have money, they're taking out loans, and they don't really have the ability to pay these loans back. And they're going to the stock market and they're saying, this is a good investment, let me buy this stock, it's going to make me a lot of money. But what happens when the prices fall and they can't make this money? So the prices do fall rapidly in something called Black Tuesday. And people can't repay these loans. So once again, the banks, they go back to the person that borrowed money and say, give us our money back. But the person says, I don't have any money. So that's going to cause some problems. As a result, investors sold their stocks, which created an economic landslide. And so stocks become almost worthless and the markets collapse. So you can see this stock investor here says $100 will buy this nice fancy car. A lot of people lost a lot of money. So within months of this crash in 1929, unemployment rose sharply, industrial production prices and wages declined sharply, and you have what is known as the Great Depression. By 1932, the factory production was cut in half. Now remember that the United States produced half the goods in the world, so that means 1/4 of the goods in production of the world production was lost. Around 9 million people in the United States lost money when their banks could not pay their savings account. People showed up to the banks and said, give me my money. They say, sorry, we don't have any money, we're closed. So by 1933, 1/4 of all Americans are unemployed, and people started moving around the country looking for jobs, and that's kind of results. This picture down here is a result of that. So as the U.S. economy failed, so did the rest of the world. So American bankers who had been loaning money to the people specifically in Europe demanded their loans from overseas. Some people could pay that back, some people couldn't. One of the biggest mistakes that the U.S. government did is they started to put high tariffs on imported goods. So once they did that, all the other countries started to do that as well. And so world trade declined sharply by about 65% within a couple years of the financial crisis. So you can see in these graphs how unemployment went from 1928 all the way up to 1932, and the percentage of the workforce that was unemployed, and then how they kind of dropped back down after that. And then in addition to that, the world trade on the right-hand side is how it started so high in 1929, and by 1933 it's cut in more than half. So this global depression, the Great Depression, is going to cause a lot of problems, and there's going to be lots of consequences to this deal, and people are going to have to deal with it in the future.